Actions speak louder than words. Today's guest truly embodies putting students first. If you've ever wondered what it would look like for students to have ownership in a high school ensemble, keep listening for some amazing inspiration and practical ideas.
Welcome to Pass the Baton, Empowering Students in Music Education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Kathryn Finch.
And I'm Theresa Hoover, and we're so glad that you're listening today.
Yeah.
Okay, Kathryn, we are kind of back into the swing of things. Winter break is behind us. All those winter performances are behind us. What's up next for you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like as Winter Sings ended, we still did start the musical. So things kind of cross. But that's kind of getting on its way too. I've already had to kind of think of that earlier end of last year. Mm-hmm. But new, I guess, would be my little kindergarten friends have their kindergarten share in the spring, or I guess very early spring, but in the end of March. So okay. Yeah. And so I guess it's always like this time of year when it's a tradition that we do it, but I always kind of, before I dive right into it and put my head down, I try to think like, how we do it. Is this still the right way that we should do it for the kids? Like what's the why? Is there a better way to do it? Or is there something that I should consider different this year? So I'm kind of in the thinking stages of like, the kindergarten informants. What I like is that I sit down with them and I plan with them what we're going to do in March. And it's always something that we've done in the classroom. But I know before COVID, I was really building this up, and we had a lot of the children's voices in the program. Like we pre-recorded them so they didn't have to be on the spot when their parents come in the room and see them. But just hearing them say like, in this song, we learned high and low or something like that. And so I'm thinking this year I might try to add some of that in. Just how can I get every child's voice written or spoken in their program in March. So,
Neat. So just to make sure I understand, so each class does a separate little. What do we call it? You had informants?
So I call it an informants. Yeah, and each class. Yeah. So what's fun is I have 4 kindergartens, so each performance is for their own families, and so they come into the music room, and it's planned by that group of children. So it's what's fun is my principal gets to see 4 different programs, because there's always some favorites that kind of make it in all of them, but they're always so different because it's driven by the kids of things we've done in class. But some classes love singing games, but some classes love playing the instruments, but some classes love the telling the story and, what moving. And so it's just fun to see how they show different things.
Oh, that's really neat. Okay. Yeah. So you'll have to keep us posted. Let us know how it's progressing, because that sounds like a neat thing for the students, because you're talking about kindergartners, right? 5-year-olds, 5 and 6-year-olds who are taking some ownership of this thing.
Yeah. It's always so adorable, and it's always amazing what they do. And it's joyful because they're so excited to share it with their families because they came up with it. They decided, Yeah. And then when their little faces are like, Mrs. Finch, I really think that at the beginning we should greet our parents, or we should tell them thank you, or can we have a picture of us on our first screen? And, because I put it like on a keynote or some kind of Google slide. So it's really fun to create with them for sure.
That's neat. Okay. So you're talking about kindergartners having ownership. And then today's guest was talking about how her high school students have ownership. What'd you think of today's interview?
Oh my gosh. Kathleen it was so nice to get to meet her. And just by listening to her, you could really see what her classroom is like, or I'm sure she would say what their classroom is like.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. We talked about it a little bit in the interview. Just, you don't always think about high school ensembles, especially, what we would consider pretty high performing high school ensembles. You wouldn't think of that always as being a student-centered environment where the students have so much ownership, but she does it.
Yeah.
And I was the whole time just thinking like, that's what it should be. This is what, every high school ensemble should look like. Middle school, elementary, like this is what it should be, with the students really just having that voice and really feeling like it's their own. So I know everybody listening is going to love it.
Oh, yeah.
They're definitely going to love it. All right. So before we get to the interview, we say this every week, but we're going to say it again. You can find the show notes in the podcast player, anything below the video and YouTube. And if you like today's interview, which we know you're absolutely going to love it, please, 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 if you could, show us some love, subscribe, follow. Apparently, Apple has changed it now. It's you follow podcasts.
Yes.
We have to use different words, right? Yeah. But whatever it is, whatever the thing is where you can continually be notified of new episodes, and then a rating or a review. That is super helpful. And it just helps more people find this podcast.
Yeah. Yep. And we also have the Buy Me a Coffee site, which just helps with some little odds and ends of costs that we have. So if you can, for less than a cup of coffee, have a membership, that would be amazing too, to help us out.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are so happy to be here, and we're excited to have today's guest, Kathleen Jacoby. I think it's neat, Kathleen, because, I knew you from when I taught in Northern Virginia, and then to just I see all of your exciting things that happen on Facebook. And then someone recently shared an article that you wrote. So we're like, we have to talk to Kathleen. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah. Would you be able to introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about your background and what your role is?
Absolutely. So currently I am the band director at Hernan High School in Fairfax, Virginia. This is year 20 of teaching high school band for me. I'm from Arlington, so I'm from up in this area, although where I went to high school is very, very different from where I'm teaching now. In South Arlington, I think we marched 18 people my freshman year. And I didn't even join band until 7th grade because my parents made me. I wanted to just play piano for the rest of my life, and they felt strongly that I enjoy music from an ensemble perspective and the teamwork and the cooperative and social aspect. And they were right. It's like they knew me or something, that I really, really loved that part. So I went to James Madison University, which was the complete opposite of South Arlington in every way, demographics, band program size and all that. And then immediately after graduating, I taught in Spotsylvania County, which is right outside Fredericksburg, and a really interesting mix because they're about halfway between Richmond and DC. We had some commuter parents, but going opposite directions. And then we had a lot of the rural farmland, kind of traditional families that were still there. So I taught there for 4 years before coming up. To me, it was coming back home to be near my family in Northern Virginia. Yeah.
Very neat. I didn't know that about you with piano. I was a piano player too, and didn't join band until high school. And it was the same thing. My parents said, "You're going to do marching band." What are you talking about?
I'm like, that's before school starts. This is not.
And I play the piano.
Right. Exactly. I get that.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So, all right, you're teaching high school band. When I think back to, again, I loved high school band. It was wonderful, but it was not something that I would have considered that I had a lot of ownership in, right? And I think that's common, right? A lot of us don't think of high school ensembles as a place where we really think about that. So that's why I was so excited to see, your work in talking about how your students have ownership. So can you maybe tell us, like, what does that even mean to you? Why is that something that you're so excited about?
And it's funny you say that because a lot of my colleagues in Fairfax had similar experiences to you. And yet, coming from such a small program, I don't know any different because we were so small, everyone mattered. When you're the only kid playing your instrument on the field or in the concert setting, I learned mellophone because we had no horn players for the marching band. And my senior project in high school was writing our drill because it didn't matter. You know what I mean? It was just a really low stakes because we weren't super competitive. So I went to college And where I didn't have any of the literature background that my fellow music majors did, because, we were kind of limited to playing grade 3 and grade 4 music. And that kind of educational music is written very different musically, artistically than a lot of the grade 6 and transcriptions. We had this awesome group that went through high school together. There were 8 of us, and 2 of us made all-state band for the first time in 40 years. And so we felt really protective of our program. We were always down at the middle school playing in their concerts. We were at the elementary schools. And so things that I coordinate for my students now just seemed obvious and intrinsic to me when I was in high school, because I had a great group of peers. I had a director who encouraged that. Also, I feel like we didn't have rules in the 90s the way they do now. Like, I could just get in my car and drive to the middle school and no one batted an eye. Like, in retrospect, what? I can't imagine that happening today. But it meant we were always in the music library pulling out stuff and asking our director if we could read it. We were always recruiting to get our program bigger. When I graduated, we were up to 45, which to us was like, whoa! I mean, we're just awesome. And so I think it was just a natural, organic way of my philosophy on teaching. As soon as I started teaching, of course, I was going to have the kids take responsibility for that kind of outreach, for bringing in their peers, for tutoring their peers. And part of it too, in Spotsylvania, I didn't have sectional coaches to call. We weren't nearby any powerhouse music programs, at least like not during marching band camp where I could have someone regularly. So I could not be in every room at once. And then from a mental health standpoint, I could not be everything to everyone. And that was just very obvious to me from the start. So if I was going to have kids running sectionals, and if I was going to have kids as my on-field drill setters, and I had to train them how to do that. So I almost kind of ran it like a mini student teaching, because I had to. There was no other option. And it's interesting because there's some things I feel strongly about have to be in the purview of the director. Quality literature choices, making sure you spend enough time on fundamentals. Like, that's not up for debate. They don't get to choose, I don't want to do my homework. Like that's not up for debate. But when it comes to them, having a choice of pieces, here I've presented, let's sight read 5 different things. Absolutely, your feedback matters, because we know that they're going to play what they love and what they enjoy doing and participating. The other side of it too is if I have to pull teeth to make an opportunity happen, then that's not the right opportunity for me to put in front of them. We just came back from Pearl Harbor this year, and when we got the invitation to do that parade a year ago, I thought it was crazy, and I didn't even seriously respond. I said something offhanded at a booster meeting, and they were all in. And I'm like, do you guys understand how much fundraising this takes and how much after school prep and additional work? But they were so excited. They came back to me with the proposal of, this is how we could make it work. Okay, I'm going to absolutely invest, because this is something clearly our community wants us to do. If I had been trying to sell it to them, we'd be doing a Busch Gardens trip 2 hours away this year. You know what I mean? So it kind of, it's the kids, it's the parents, it's the community. I will put it all on the plate for them, but then based on their feedback, we'll go from there, if that makes sense.
That's incredible. I feel like my jaw is just dropping because I'm listening to you talk and think, like, wow. What?
Just I feel like amazing... I'm rambling. So
no, but and I've got a dog with a squeaky toy. But sorry about the squeaks in the back. But what incredible opportunities for your students. I just can't even, like, I'm just thinking about what that would feel like to be a student in your program and to really feel like I matter that much.
Yeah.
It's
and to me, it seems like, how else do we do it? Right. Because I'm here for you. Tiffany Hitz just had a wonderful interview published in Fairfax County Public Schools about her being recognized by the Sousa Foundation. And she talks about how if she didn't teach music, she would have taught something else. She's a teacher first. And I felt very strongly, that comment really resonated with me, that to me, it is the kids first The music is secondary. And hopefully we make these amazing musical moments, but it's the kids are why I'm here.
Yeah. But also too, I hear you say, I mean, something that we kind of talk about a lot too, is that it's the teachers still have must-haves or must-dos, right? It's not like you're just like, children, what are we going to do?
Right. You know? Right.
You do know what they need next. And there's going to be times where it's like, no, I'm going to drive the lesson today. I know what we need to do. And then, but there's other times when you're like you just said, you know, you realize how important something is to them or their community and you respond. Right. So yeah, but I think a lot of people worry like, okay, that means I'm just at the whim of where the wind blows us. And it's not that.
No, I think that's a really good distinction to make. And, you know, working with high schoolers, they respond to logic a lot more. Like the prefrontal cortexes are starting to develop. And most of the time I don't get pushback when I explain why we're doing what we're doing. And I try and do that before we get to the point where they're going to push back. So going into it, this is the point of what we're doing. This is the point of why we need to do it, even if you don't like it. And almost always, you know, we have such great kids. By the time they get to high school, they're there because they really want to be there and they've committed after a couple of years of training already. We totally changed how we learned our marching band fundamentals this year. And it took a whole year of prep work, of groundwork, of me telling the kids, first of all, we could keep doing things the way we're doing, and this is what will happen if we do, or we can modernize for these goals. And I did actually feel very strongly that they needed to choose which way we were going to go. And I even asked for parent input a little bit about our product, what we were putting on. And universally, they said they wanted to modernize. And I said, okay, that's going to require these changes. They're going to be really uncomfortable at first, but they're to get us to the goal. And so band camp was tough this year. Every morning, okay, we're going to learn the new way of doing it today, and it's going to feel uncomfortable. And they would complain about it. And then we would, at the end of the day, we would decompress and talk it through. And they would acknowledge, you're right. The reasons I'm unhappy with it are because it's different, not because, oh, that makes sense, that, okay, right, we're going towards that goal. And as long as we kept that end goal in mind, they went through it and they had a really successful season because of that buy-in. But I would have never, again, I wouldn't have pushed against them to change that. Ultimately, I'm going to teach structure, no matter traditional way, modern ways, course style, traditional style, that I'm going to be teaching no matter what. So it doesn't really matter to me, again, within those boundaries, which one we're doing. And they do need to feel like they're being heard. And that's true for how many adults too. A lot of times we just want to be acknowledged, that you hear me and you acknowledge my pain and suffering. And now I will go through now that I've said my piece.
And you tell me there's a good reason for it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And you guys were the ones who wanted to do it this way. So these are the steps that we're going to do to get there. Mm-hmm. We also talk, a lot of times it's under the guise of talking about social media, but in general, when is it appropriate to speak up in front of everyone else? And when is it a direct conversation? Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of, like we use the band app to do announcements every day. And we go through really strictly at the beginning, the kinds of comments you should be putting on that. These are updates and announcements and questions with answers. If you have an issue, that's a private conversation with Miss Jacoby. And you go straight to her and you have that thing. What's one of the examples we had? Things you cannot change, like what time lunch break is. I think that's actually one of the things we put in there. You have a problem with something you cannot change, you go to Miss Jacoby. But I tell all my student section leaders, if you think we've gone too long without water, you absolutely need to tell me that. You know, that's a physical thing. And that's very different than complaining versus, hey, you missed the 10-minute mark. Absolutely. You know, remind us or something like that. So that takes education and that takes practice. And it also means for me, I have to be forgiving when they mess it up the first few times and not snap at them or chide them or, you know, cut them down in front of the rest of the group. And then, you know, after I do something new, usually the upperclassmen take care of that for me to the new freshmen.
Yeah.
And I don't have to say anything. They take care of it before I can ever log on. Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of what you're saying too is the fact that, you know, you get to know your students, they get to know you, they get to know each other. You build that trust, you build the relationships, you build all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen otherwise.
Right. Right. And also reading those nonverbal cues and, how excited or not excited they are. It's constant. And that's just like any other form of assessment that we do with musical accuracy or written accuracy, just constantly getting that pulse from them.
Yeah. Wow. So what are some specific some specific things that you do in your ensemble that really helps these students feel like they have that voice? I know you've talked about some kind of general ideas, but if someone listening is like, all right, well, like, what's a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. You talked earlier about the article that came out. So one of the examples from that is the student feedback from how we are rehearsing. So I am going to teach them and demonstrate for them or use recordings of this is what it should sound like. This is what good tone should sound like. But then I need them to respond back if we've achieved that or not. And I need them to use correct vocabulary. A big aspect of compassionate criticism, right, is to remove these value-laden words. And the kids are so quick to say crappy or sucky or, and they tend to actually be much harder on themselves than we are. But using, if we're talking tone, fuzzy, airy, clear, dark, bright, more descriptive. And in fact, just yesterday I was telling them, I don't even want you to tell me if you like it or not. Pretend that I'm blind and you're describing what's on the smartboard right now. Use what colors and fonts and sizes. That's what I'm going for, is true description of what we hear. And then once we can describe it accurately, then we can make judgment calls about if we want it to change. So developing that trust and the ability to mess up without this all comes into a growth mindset, right? That a mistake is not an inherently bad thing. It's a correction, and we grow from it. So if we're doing tone quality, and at the very beginning, I might not call out individuals. We'll call out a section. All right. So trumpets are going to play this F and match this sound that's coming from the trombones. And everyone who's not a trumpet, I want you to just listen. And then the kids are going to use those word banks that we described and say, this is what I heard when those people played or when that group played. And we talk a lot about how much easier it is to listen critically when it's not yourself. Not only does it change, what you hear, reverberations in your skull, but when you're playing, you're thinking about playing and you're listening. So it's easier to just listen than it is to listen and produce sound. So remove one of the variables. And then that also makes it a little more trusting that, oh, of course I can't hear myself as well as other people can. So that's going to make me more open to feedback. And as they get more trusting, we can go into individuals playing. I almost never call out individuals unless we're talking really basic concepts or pitch matching at the beginning. After that, they know, they can hear it. And I think a lot has changed in our world post-pandemic with feelings and how we emote those feelings. I never want a kid to come in and feel like they're going to be put on the spot in my class in a negative way, or unless it's me asking for a volunteer, which is a very, very different scenario. So we build up from there until we get to the point where we can run a section of music, and then I can ask them what they heard. And with my top group, I can leave it completely open-ended. With the younger groups, I'm going to be very specific about what did you hear about pulse? And their instinct is to say that it was bad because ? Why would you be asking it? And so I tell them I'm going to intentionally ask them about all these different things because I'm not telling you if it was bad or good. I want you to tell me. And then if they say the pulse was separating when the trumpets came in or when the snare drum was not lining up with the flutes, then, okay, so how do you want to change that? And then they will use one of the things we've done before, like, okay, let's all count and figure along, or let's wind pattern, or let's have the snare drum play while everyone else sings. Again, as they're younger, I might prep them. I might coach them a little bit on maybe we could try one of these three things and they choose which one's going to be most relevant. But I found before that some of the times if I think a trick is going to work, and they don't respond, when I move to the back of the classroom, I figure out, oh, it's because they really can't hear from back here, right? I really do need that feedback about what is going to help them self-correct. most effectively. And then we try it again and we say, was it better, same, or worse? Or, we'll do thumbs up, thumbs side, thumbs down. And we'll do it until they feel comfortable with it. And then we move on to the next thing. I got microphones set up in my classroom last year. It was one of those, I just hadn't gotten around to doing it post-pandemic. And another director mentioned how helpful it was. And I'm like, why am I not doing this? That's ridiculous. So I have the microphone going almost constantly. And then we can just go back and play back real quickly. What did you hear? And was that accurate? And with the really good microphones, it's a good indicator. My phone would make everything sound tinny, and bright. And I want them to have a real sense of, well, it exposes overplaying very quickly. It's the classic, my oboe always is shocked. I'm very loud. Yes, you are. And they wouldn't hear the other people say that, but they would hear it. They would recognize that on the recording. And there are other times where they go, we sound wonderful. And I say, yes. And you need to hear that. You need to hear, be validated that what you're hearing and what you're interpreting is correct. Yeah. So in terms of practical tips, we do a lot of that. And it's amazing how quickly they self-adjust as they get better and better at doing it. But again, as a teacher, I might narrow it down as they're younger. Just think about pulse, just think about matching, just think about, tuning between the people on other sides of you. And then we will start to expand and think in more and more things. But it also helps the buy-in with the easier stuff too, right? That intentionality of, I know you know the fingerings to F stretches, but can you do the fingerings and listen to the two people on either side of you and listen to the tuba and listen to the front? And if you're not doing those things perfectly, we're not ready to move on. So we just had our winter concert and we're doing like grade 2 music right now because they're not sight reading the articulations and the dynamics. And I said, these notes and rhythms. So we can do the next thing, right? Like your brain can process more information. They're like, you're right. We totally can. So it's not just notes and fingerings and rhythms. Mm-hmm. So that's where we are right now.
The two big things that I'm hearing, you're talking about scaffolding, right?
Yes, me too. That's Theresa.
Just, I mean, it's incredible how detailed that scaffolding is to really set them up for success. But it's also, you're giving them these, not even giving them, like they're gaining these skills to be so independent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, we've had different people talk about that. And short story, I did like a research project where it ended up that was also a big topic, but you're giving them these skills so that they don't need you all the time.
Yes.
And that's the goal, right?
Right.
I mean, we're not trying to say you don't need a job, but they don't need to have you in front of them in order to progress and make music and all of those things. And it's so exciting to think about students who can do this stuff without us.
Yes, exactly. And that's what they're going to apply way past my band class, mm-hmm. right? When they're thinking about what's the game plan, what's the to-do list. And I require them, when we do have the opportunity to have sectional coaches come in, they need to have a to-do list of what they want to work on. And that applies to everything in life. What is right? My to-do list? And if they're a section leader, like in marching band, it's not just the to-do list. It's how are we going to accomplish this? It's a mini lesson plan. And it's funny because I don't even use that terminology with them. Mm-hmm. I just tell it, we're just breaking down what we need to accomplish and how that needs to happen. And then by the end of the year, they're like, wait, we know how to do what? Right. Yeah. But it's the same principles.
Something I heard you say, and I just would love, because you articulated how you scaffold so beautifully, but you talked about like when they're ready. How do you cultivate that environment when they're really ready, when they're ready to be vulnerable with you or offer suggestions and things like that? Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot. We're talking scaffolding and differentiation too, to a certain degree. From day one, I love the Foundations for a Superior Band program has these exercises where everyone is on the same page, but they have multiple options of what they want to play. Mm-hmm. And we talk right at the beginning, you choose your own option. You choose what makes sense for you. And I'm vulnerable with them about if I'm having a bad tone day, or I'm just not like, it's just not gelling, I stay on option one, and I'm really good at what I do. And I'm just going for that easier workout, that easier warm up. If I'm having a great day, I'm going to choose a harder one. If you're new on your instrument, you should stay on option one. If you have been on your instrument 2 or 3 years, why don't you try doing one of the middle ones? If you're feeling great, why don't you try that harder example? And giving them that permission, and also to know that I can go back to option one anytime I want. And I remind them, I mean, probably every 2 or 3 weeks, let's make a really intentional thought. Which one are you doing that's best for you personally? And so part of it is creating that community, that culture of, I have to make decisions for myself, and I don't need to feel singled out that I'm doing it differently from the people next to me. And I can go up and down anytime I want, without it being what's the word I'm looking for? A value laden, I'm gooder, right. I'm better or I'm worse than the people next to me because of what I'm choosing for today. And then it grows, right? So the more people who choose different things, the more they all become comfortable doing whichever one makes the most sense for them. And then today we were starting to expand range in my middle group. And hey, if you are feeling really good about the fingerings on this scale, would you try the upper octave? And I'm going to slow down the tempo. So either you're playing with perfect tone and perfect technique in the comfortable register, or you can put some of your brain power towards those harder fingerings. And either way, we're going to play this together nice and slowly. I would have set them up for failure if I had gone our normal tempo and expected them to do the harder stuff at the same time. I also remind them that your instrument might not allow for you to go up an octave. So again, it's no political statement, no commentary on which option you're doing right now. Everyone needs to do the one that's best for them. So that is going to make them a lot more flexible towards doing what's best for them and not worrying about looking like they're not as advanced as the other people. Again, I don't really call them out almost ever to do it on their own. For feedback, I will ask them to raise their hand before they shout something out. If I notice, and this is actually a special education trick, if I notice that some students are not volunteering, I'm going to give them prep time to think about what they're going to say. So I'll say, okay, this next time around, I want Sally and Curtis to give me some feedback. Let's listen again. And I just move on like it wasn't a big deal. And that gives Sally and Curtis time to even just make up something, even if it's not accurate, to practice saying it out loud. And they have 30 seconds to process before I'm done talking, and I just circle back around. Okay, Sally, what were you thinking? And even if Sally gives wide eyes, I'll say, okay, start with, did it sound fine? Yeah. Okay. So let's put that in the vocabulary. Or did it not sound fine? Let's put that in the vocabulary. And everyone in the room, what's a word we might use? So I'm trying to get them to practice just talking out loud and processing before they start to actually offer their own feedback. Also, if I have the same people who keep volunteering, I might say, okay, this next time I'm going to ask a sophomore, or I'm going to ask a trumpet, and I'm going to very intentionally go in on a smaller section that doesn't include the eager volunteers.
Yeah, that I can imagine that must make those students just feel so much more comfortable knowing that you're not saying, okay, Kathryn, now what do you think?
Right. Yeah.
And Kathryn just freezes, right?
Right.
I think we've all probably been in those situations.
Right.
Where, but to have the time to process, and I imagine they could probably even say something that somebody else has already said, right? As long as they speak.
They might even lean over and ask the person next to them, what am I supposed to say? You know what I mean? And yeah, I'm ignoring that, and I'm letting that happen because I'm just trying to get them used to talking or to saying out loud what they're thinking.
Yeah. But you're also showing that what they have to say matters, and that you really do want to hear from everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one thing that I really enjoyed, becoming more adept during 2020 with Google Classroom or Google Forms and stuff.
Yeah.
We know we get very different feedback when it's written and when they can speak freely. And that is really helpful. I have my generic concert assessment form that uses our Vibota rubric and sample descriptors, and they need to write down for me a measure number, what they're talking about, what section, and a descriptor. Again, not a value laden one, some other kind of descriptor. And so we can use that rubric anytime it doesn't just have to be after concerts. And if I post that in Schoology or, put a QR code on the board and ask everyone real quick, just give me a tone comment or give me a technique comment, a lot of them are really insightful that they wouldn't volunteer out loud. And then that gives me the opportunity to go back and be like, Kathryn, what was that you said? That was really good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And Kathryn's had time to think about it and process and can even read their answer out loud.
That's wonderful. Because I think that's the other thing that, we try to emphasize is that, empowering all music students,
right?
Not just the ones who are the leaders and the section leaders and the drum major and then but really making sure that every student has that opportunity to have a voice and to feel like they matter. And you've clearly been saying that the whole time, right? But it's just neat to hear some additional examples of how that works and what that looks like in your classroom.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Another thing I'm struck by is just that, not that you probably don't do like starters or parties or things like that, but I know sometimes we say like the way we get people to buy in is these fun things we do together. But like, it is so obvious that, you said at the beginning, you're here for the kids, and it's embedded in everything that you do. So it's just like, it just hits the learner in the face of like, well, she really means it, because we do it every day.
Right.
I did an exit ticket where I got to write to her, but yesterday I spoke about what I heard, but then the other time I had options on where I am in my warm up. And this is, it's just everywhere, which is just really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, the beautiful part about circulating too is making those little connections and checking in with them and, asking how things are going, or, I have to say we got renovated about 3 years ago, and I actually have room to circulate now, and it's the greatest thing ever. So one of the kids was saying how my podium's pushed back really far, and I'm like, because I'm never on it. It doesn't matter. I want it out of my way because I'm in everyone's face all the time.
That's great. Then that's fun for you because you get to know them, you get to hear from different perspectives. You just get such a different view than if you're just glued in one spot.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And again, my husband's a percussionist. He's also a high school band director. He came by, he was just supposed to drop off some music and we were rehearsing. And when I wasn't looking, he switched my metronome on from, he switched a button that turned it from a dot, dot, dot to the metronome, like annoying, like a marching band. And I was in the back of the room and I was like, why'd you do that? And he goes, because percussion can't hear that. And I looked around and I asked the percussion, that's not true. And they're like, it's true, Mr. Jacoby. And I'm like, what? And I'm a flutist. I'm in the front row, so it bugs the crap out of me. And I said, okay, wait, no, do that again. And I stood in the back and went, oh my God, the percussion really could not hear the setting I had. And even, again, being vulnerable in front of the kids and the students, everything I do is because at some point, some student gave me feedback. I need the text larger on the board, or I need it to be over to the side, or I need you to repeat it. But they didn't volunteer it. I asked for it. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's constant asking, and then kind of making fun of myself for going, oh, why didn't I think of that? And then the kids have a laugh, and then we move on and do it differently. Yeah. I also have to switch the metronome back at times because I have to give the front row a break. And then I make a joke about, see, it's good because we need to have internal pulse. We don't need the metronome on. So let's do another exercise to make sure we're safe here. And again, just leading to that open conversation. And then the kids have that buy-in. Oh, we know why we're doing it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We often ask people about, how the ownership has impacted the students, but you've told us that the whole time. It's great. But what's kind of neat is that it's not like, well, I started doing it this way and I noticed this change. No, that's just what the program is.
Right.
And I bet the students wouldn't even be able to say, oh, well, because of the way she does this, I get, because that's just what band is to them.
Yes.
And that's really neat to hear. Do you see any other outside effects of this, like that trickle into other parts of them? You might not. I don't know.
I hear it anecdotally from, scout leaders and church leaders. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes parents will say my kid who didn't speak at all just blossomed, and we hadn't seen that side of them. I got an email from a parent yesterday saying that her daughter, who did not speak for the first 2 years of high school, I mean, like more than 2 words, just got elected TBS president at her school. She's not a music major, but she loves marching band and she's in concert band. And I'm like, TBS president? I mean, that is so out of 4 years ago, would have never predicted that that kind of kid would put herself out there. And she started as a music librarian, and then she became a section leader, and we coached a lot on her presentation and articulating, elocution so people can hear you, because all the ideas were already in her head, just getting them out there. So that is the kind of stuff that when I hear that coming back, and sometimes it takes a couple of years, which can be really hard to wait. One of my favorites, a few years ago, I got a call from the MIT Nuclear Fusion Lab, and they were asking for a background check on one of my clarinet section leaders. And number one, would he be responsible enough to work in the nuclear fusion lab with an actual nuclear reactor? And number two, could he be trusted to have a key to be in there without a faculty member? And I'm going like, he hasn't even been in my program for 3 years. Like, you're calling me, which is awesome. But the MIT professor said, it's crazy. Every reference I've called today has been a high school band director for every kid who has applied for this job. I said, that's not crazy. That's not a coincidence. This is 100% the kids who learn these skills, going to Dr. Tim clinics and Scott Lang, and just thinking very intentional about leadership and applying it. Yes, it makes sense to me that those are the same kids who are applying to work in the MIT nuclear fusion lab. But that was the most wild example. It was just so funny how this guy who's an actual rocket scientist was surprised. Why are all these band directors?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think it absolutely applies to every aspect of their lives.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, you've given us so many examples, and they've been really easy to see what your classroom looks like, which is awesome. If somebody was listening and thinking like, what could I try tomorrow? What would you suggest they do?
We have to train them to listen in our music ensemble classes the same way that we have to train them what fingerings are on there. So I would treat it as, this is a concept that I need to do a little bit of every day. And let's start today. There's no reason. Today is the best time was to start a year ago. Today is the second best time to start. So starting today, before we play anything, let's just talk real quick about what are we listening for when we play. Anything worth doing is worth doing well, right? Or a great drum corps phrase I heard this summer was, the way we do anything is the way we do everything. So before we play that first note today or sing that first note today, what are we listening for? And even just start with like 3 things. Okay, and let's do it, and then stop. And what did you hear? And I want specific volunteers. And then after the kids who volunteer raise their hand, then, okay, next time I'm going to call on these people and do it again. And just keep integrating that into every aspect. I tell the kids when I'm trying to introduce something new, remind me, if I haven't done this, raise your hand. And it's always the first row clarinets and flutes who remind me. And I'll do the same thing if I'm trying to get rid of a bad habit conducting. Remind me. Put hand up if I go on. And they will. They're really good about it. Okay, I need to ask you. I'm trying to integrate this into my rehearsal. So help remind me if I haven't asked you. Okay, now let's do our next warm-up that we do every day. Okay, what's the point of this warm-up? So what are we listening for? The intention of this warm-up is to keep a steady pulse. Okay, let's do it. And then I'm going to ask you, did we do a steady pulse? And those kinds of immediate feedback, I think everyone can do at any age level starting today with whatever concept you're working on. And it will become habit, but it takes time. Just like every habit takes time. But the kids have to learn it. You have to learn it and internalize it. But that would be my number one. If I started something new tomorrow, that is what I think would be the most important thing.
Yeah, that's a great
I think it's very fair too to say it takes time, and you might get some eyes and some blinking and some, and definitely some wait time. Yeah. But just keep at it, because it's like, we're not used to it. They're not used to it. Like, everybody just has to have time. That's fair. Yeah.
And put the sticky note on your podium that says, stop, or list, or ask this, or, I have a slide up on my board, the first couple, I know that I can just toggle to slide 2 or 3, and that's going to be my tone descriptors that we came up with in class. I always start with a blank slate. I always have, try and get them to come up with their own words, and I might help populate. But again, for any concept, whether it's rhythm or balance or dynamics or, put those words up on the board and help them. It's no different than having a word bank for any other class. Yeah. And you're just it's putting the bumpers on the bowling alley, and it's just safer that way.
Yeah, that's such a good way to do it. Yeah. So another kind of question we ask everybody, you talked about how, going up through your high school program, you did have a lot of ownership and you really felt empowered as a young music student. How do you feel empowered, and how, where's the ownership for you as a music educator now? How do you kind of empower yourself? No, that's a tough one.
Yeah. I really appreciate that I have a supportive administration that does not micromanage me, but I know that's not the case for everyone. This to me is not just band director, but life. If it's something I enjoy doing and I think there's benefit to it, I'm going to put more energy into it. And then trying to shed the things that do not bring me joy and I do not enjoy doing, or this thinking of it as kind of stages. And there might be times where I am more proactive about collecting playing assignments and grading them. And there might be times where my plate is just too full and I just don't know that that is going to make the kids better in the way I want them to for the amount of time that it costs me. So that's where I feel like I have a degree of ownership in, like we were talking, the trip, for example, and what direction is my focus going to be. And I think it's important that we reflect, how many hours a day am I spending on this concept? And is that, or this part of my life? And is that actually the priority in my life? And is there a place that I can cut back on? We've stopped doing after school rehearsals. The point of those was initially to bring in outside assistance, and I was able to find other people who could help me during the day. And then I went, okay, but that's going to take away from full rehearsal time if we're doing more sectional time. And that was the dumbest thing I've ever thought, because the better the kids are on their instruments, the more efficient my rehearsals are. So like, that's just bogus. It's like having a twice as efficient rehearsal when we do have sectional coaches or other people come in. And then I've also found that actually buys me back a little bit of time to actually score study and walk around and make sure everyone has what they need. And did that kid get the right strength mouthpiece? And then I have someone telling me, you really should get this brand of mutes for these kids and look into that. Now, sectional coaches are expensive, and I am under no illusion, again, in Spotsylvania, I would have killed to have access to people. But even when it's directed time with the kids or bringing in college students, I mean, that's what my first 4 years, it was always just my friends, like, I'll buy you lunch if you will drive all the way out here and do this. So that's where I feel like I have a degree of autonomy. There are times where I feel like almost too much autonomy with literature. Like sometimes I wish someone would give me a smaller list of fewer decisions to make so I didn't have everything there. But what we program is our curriculum. And so I think that's one of the most important things that we do is picking appropriate literature, picking a variety of literature and backgrounds and composers. And again, treating it as, when I look at across the whole year, what have my students achieved by the end of the year? If I looked at all the pieces that they've played or all the method books they've done, what does that look like when I get to the end of the year? Did I focus on the right things? Did my priorities for them actually come through in those decisions and what they're looking at? And so I have autonomy to do easier music. That's the only thing that changed when we stopped doing evening rehearsals. But if anything, kids want to be here now because I'm not keeping them from sports. I'm not putting them in a direct conflict path with their birthday dinner, with their grandma, with their jobs. I have a lot of students who work jobs. Yeah. And so by removing that point of conflict, they're happier. I'm happier not dealing, fielding parent emails about, I think this is a terrible excuse for them to miss after school rehearsal. I get it done during the day. And if that means we're playing 16th notes and not 32nd notes, that they don't know any different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so that's where I'm really, really grateful for the degree of flexibility that I have. But again, it comes back down to intention and intentionally making those decisions, and never all at once, one little thing at a time. Did that work? Did that work? And I did not get rid of the evening rehearsals for the top group until I had the parent buy-in too. I didn't want them to perceive that we would not be as good. But I told them, just like I talked to the kids, I'm getting a huge amount of pushback at these activities. Is this something you value? Do we feel good if we, still achieve, but a different level of music? And then they all admitted they didn't know what a level of music was anyway. So like, you know what I mean? And that the group of parents 10 years ago would not have felt that way. It was not a battle worth fighting. Today's parents absolutely feel that way. So, okay. All right, let's change that and modify that so everyone feels better. And then I feel better about it.
Well, how can people connect with you and learn more about your work?
Probably my work email. No, which is KG Jacoby at FCPS, Fairfax County Public Schools.edu. Several other women and I put together a website called BD as in band director, toolkit.weebly.com. And that was our effort to begin diversifying our composers, our adjudicators, our clinicians, the literature we program. And it's kind of it just gets continuously updated when we get more resources. So it's a hub for a bunch of different resources. And some of the presentations we've given at state conferences. So again, that's bdtoolkit.weebly.com. And then we also run a Facebook page, Virginia Inclusion. No, that's still BD Toolkit, excuse me. And again, where we're just trying to amplify voices and amplify the accomplishments of our peers and our colleagues.
I'll make sure that we have links to both of those in the notes. Oh, this has been such a good morning. I was telling Kathryn when we first came on, I was a little grumpy from emails that I gotten, but now I'm just like, oh, this is amazing. I feel
that's awesome.
Yes. So thank you so much for giving us your time and just sharing everything. It's been awesome. Your kids are so lucky.
That's very kind. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Of course, we really appreciate it. If you liked today's episode, you will love the PassTheBatonBook.com website, where you can find free resources, coaching services, and how to support Pass the Baton. Speaking of support, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Thanks again for listening.